Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 33rd deck in the series and it's titled Bororph, which I know is a weird name. I'll explain that in just a minute. But if you haven't seen this show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a deck around a theme of the chosen card. Now, before we get into the actual deck tech today, I do want to take a second to plug some of the social media that we are on. So if you're interested, you can follow us over on Twitter at 13POYNZ. You can find us on Reddit at POYNZ13. I know they're backwards, it's confusing. Or you can send us an email at dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. And I also am posting a list of every single deck that we've done for this series in the description of this video below. So if you missed anything and you would like to go back and check any of the videos we've done or any of the decks that we've built, that will be in the description as well. So feel free to check that out. But other than that, let's get into today's deck. So to start with, our random card of the week is Daru Sanctifier. This is 3 and a white for a 1/4 creature cleric. You can morph it, which means you can pay 3 generic mana and it's face down as a 2/2 creature, and then we can turn it face up at any time for 1 and a white, and when Daru Sanctifier is turned face up, we destroy target enchantment. So Daru Sanctifier is a super unique card. Usually when you think of morph decks, they tend to be blue, green, black. White is not usually the color that comes to mind when you're thinking of morph. And so to that end, I decided to make a deck that you don't expect morph to be in, but is very heavily focused on the morph aspect. And so with that, we chose our commander for this week as Gerrard Weatherlight Hero. 2 red, white for a legendary creature, human soldier, 3/3 with first strike. When Gerrard Weatherlight Hero dies, exile it and return to the battlefield all artifact and creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So this is a Boros morph deck, hence the name Bororph. And Gerrard is here in the commander slot for one main reason. If we fill up the board with morphs and then someone decides to wipe the board, Gerrard is able to sacrifice himself, or I suppose exile himself, and return all those creatures from the graveyard back to the battlefield. The catch is that even if they were face down as morph creatures when they died, they are in the graveyard face up and will return to the battlefield as face up creatures. So we can fill the board with as many morphs as possible and wind up getting a ton of value back from Gerrard. So now that we've taken a look at our random card and our commander, let's take a look at some of the themes for this deck. Now, as I've already mentioned, the first theme is, of course, morphs, which is demonstrated here by probably the most famous red morph of all time. We have Chroma Angel of Fury. She is 5 red, red, red for a legendary creature angel. She's a 6/6. And it also says this spell can't be countered, has flying, trample, protection from white and from blue. You can pay a red, and Chroma Angel of Fury gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it has morph for 3 red, red, red. So we are able to play this as a morph for 3 mana, flip it up for 6, and hopefully kind of get in some maybe sneak attacks on some opponents. Anyone who's not able to block it, who has red or blue creatures, anything that can't quite deal with a giant 6/6 with flying and trample. So a nice kind of sneaky card in there. And then if we're playing morphs, obviously we need to try to find ways to make our morphs cheaper. So our second theme is finding ways to decrease the cost of a morph. Morph is 3 generic mana. So if we have a card like Dream Chisel, which is 2 generic mana for an artifact that says face down creature spells you play cost 1 less to play, now all of our morphs cost 2 mana. And if we're able to find other ways to decrease the value even more, things that say all spells cost 1 generic mana less, or any colorless spells cost 1 generic mana less, we can make our morphs cost 1, maybe even 0 mana if we're incredibly lucky. So Dream Chisel is a phenomenal card, and pretty cheap, it's only 2 mana. And then our final theme is colorless spells in general. So we have a ton of cards that want us to be playing colorless spells, which sounds weird because this is a Boros deck. We're not a colorless deck. We don't have a ton of artifacts. But if you cast a Morph for its Morph cost, it is on the stack a colorless spell. So if we have something like Nettle Drone, which is 2 and a red for a 3/1 creature Eldrazi drone, it has Devoid, so it actually has no color, and we can tap it to do 1 damage to each opponent, and whenever we cast a colorless spell, we untap Nettle Drone. So we play Nettle Drone, we tap it to do 1 damage to everybody, cast a Morph, and that untaps Nettle Drone. And we have a couple of cards in here that like to benefit from colorless spells, but Nettle Drone can be incredibly powerful if we're able to have it on the battlefield for a couple of turns. So with our themes kind of taken care of, let's take a quick look at some key cards in this deck. Some of the cards that we would love to get on the battlefield if we can. The first of those is Ugin the Ineffable. 6 mana for the 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Ugin. Has a passive ability that says colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. Absolutely perfect for what we're trying to do. That makes our morphs cost 1, and with Dream Chisel makes them free. And it also has +1, exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When that token leaves the battlefield, you put the exiled card in your hand. So we are able to create a 2/2 token, or a 2/2 spirit, and then when that creature dies, we put the exiled card into our hand, essentially giving us a way to draw a card every single turn, which in Boros is incredibly useful. And then it also has -3, destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So we've also got removal. So honestly, Ugin, every single part of what Ugin is doing is exactly what we want. It makes our stuff cheaper, draws us cards, and destroys things. There's really nothing more we could ask for a card in this deck. And then our second key card is Skirk Alarmist, which I actually didn't even know existed before I started building this deck. And it's 1 and a red for a 1/2 creature wizard. It has haste, and you can tap it to turn target face down creature you control face up, and at the end of turn, you sacrifice that creature. So this gets us around the morph costs, but we do have to sacrifice our creatures at the end of turn. Sometimes that's okay. Things like Daru Sanctifier, when it's flipped face up, it destroys an enchantment. So if we have Skirk Alarmist, we can flip it face up for free, destroy an enchantment, maybe throw it under some massive attacker, block, and then we're good to keep going. So Skirk Alarmist is great for surprises. It's great to just kind of get the morphs up there and get those abilities whenever we need them. And then finally, our last key card is Marshal's Anthem. 2 white for an enchantment with multi-kicker 1 and a white. And creatures you control get +1/+1. Then, when Marshal's Anthem enters the battlefield, return up to X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times Marshal's Anthem was kicked. So we are able to return a ton of creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield, which is going to be good for us because a lot of morphs are going to be dying. We're going to be trying to move them in and out of the graveyard, and being able to give them +1/+1, turn them into 3/3s. Awesome ability. Definitely what we want to see in this deck. So now that we've taken a look at some themes, some key cards, I do want to highlight just a couple of cool interactions between some cards in this deck. And in doing so, for this deck in particular, I do want to make sure that we look at just kind of some unique cards, some cards that maybe not everybody knows about. So this first one is between Proteus Machine and Frontline Strategist. So Proteus Machine, 3 mana for a 2/2 artifact creature, has Morph for 0, so we can flip it up completely free. And it says when Proteus Machine is turned face up, its type becomes the creature type of your choice. So we can make it into any creature type we want. And then Frontline Strategist is 1 white mana for a 1/1 soldier, Morph for 1 white. When Frontline Strategist is turned face up, prevent all combat damage non-soldiers would deal this turn. So we can flip up Proteus Machine, make it a soldier, have Frontline Strategist, and then that allows us to either surprise block a bunch of our opponent's creatures if they're attacking us, hopefully kill some of them with some soldiers, or If we're attacking in and our opponents block and we don't want our creatures to die, we can just flip up Proteus Machine, make it a soldier, use Frontline Strategist, and keep our creatures around, and again, hopefully kill some of our opponent's creatures on the way out. So probably not a super common thing that's going to happen in the game, and we're not super heavy into Soldier Tribal, but it is kind of a neat interaction that could happen throughout the course of the game. And then our second cool interaction is between Aven Liberator and Weathered Bodyguards. So Aven Liberator, 2 white for a bird soldier, 2/3 with flying, Morph for 3 and a white. And when Aven Liberator is turned face up, target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Weathered Bodyguards, on the other hand, is 5 and a white, has Morph for 3 and a white, it's a 2/5. And as long as Weathered Bodyguards is untapped, all combat damage that would be dealt to you by unblocked creatures is dealt to Weathered Bodyguards instead. So if we are able to morph both of these creatures up in the same turn, when we're getting attacked by a ton of our opponent's creatures, hopefully from a mono-colored deck, we can make all the damage go to Weathered Bodyguards, but also give it protection from the color of whatever the most damage is going to be, meaning that it will most likely survive the combat anyway. And then we're able to just keep doing it, because Weathered Bodyguards is not an ability that triggers when it's flipped face up, just Aven Liberators. So we're able to keep the Weathered Bodyguards around, survive for a couple of turns, and if we're able to somehow flip Aven Liberator back and forth, we could keep this going for an indefinite amount of time. But that is an overall quick look at our Bororph deck, Boros Morph deck. And the very last thing we're going to have to do for the deck tech itself is take a look at the price. Now, you may be able to guess this, but this is actually a pretty cheap deck. This wound up coming in at $61.60 under the TCG mid, and the most expensive card in the deck is Mystic Forge, which is actually $6.15. And it's a 4-mana artifact that says you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact card or a colorless non-land card. Then you can tap it, pay 1 life, and exile the top card of your library. Now, this doesn't immediately look useful. However, if we cast a morph from the top of our deck, it does count as a colorless non-land card. So we can use this to morph cards off the top of our deck, basically giving us a ton of card draw in Boros, which is incredibly useful. Now, with that being said, it is a $6.15 card. So if you wanted to put this deck down to just a little over $50, right around $55, this would be the card to cut. It is the most expensive one in there, but if you have a copy or if you're willing to pay the $6 for it, it is a phenomenal card in this deck. It really lets you churn through a bunch of your cards and play a ton of creatures in ways that you probably wouldn't be able to otherwise. Now, that is our deck tech. That is our Bororph deck. That's our price. And the only thing left to do is actually see how this deck performs in a game. So we are going to jump into a quick game with 3 opponents. In this case, we have Varina, Lich Queen, Radha, Heart of Keld, and a partner pairing of Siani, Eye of the Storm, and Elegeth, Crossroads Augur. So Varina Lich Queen is Shawn's deck of the week. It is a zombie tribal deck, and its goal is really to get out a ton of zombies as quickly as possible and just do a ton of damage. Radha, Heart of Keld, is Bilal's deck for the week. It likes to ramp into some big things, play a ton of big spells, and just get as many lands on the board as possible. And then Siani and Elegeth is here to draw cards when it should be scrying. And then thanks to Siani's ability, where it cares about attacking flying creatures, Jason also has a ton of little flyers that he's going to use to try to win his way to victory. Now, looking at these 3 decks, I do think the one that probably concerns me the most is Varina. Our morphs will probably be bigger than the zombies most of the time, but there's going to be a lot of zombies, and that concerns me. I don't know if this is necessarily the go wide kind of deck. We can probably stop Radha. She gets super big, but we can still throw a morph under it. We do have a bunch of flyers if we need them, so I don't think Siani and Elegeth will be too much of a problem, but I don't know if we can keep up with the go wide strategy of the zombies. So I think our main goal is probably going to be to try to go over top of the zombies, make our creatures a little bit too big for them to deal with. But that is going to be the game for this week, so that's coming right up. I do want to very quickly mention that with the game recording, there was some technical difficulties at the very end of the recording. We do get to see the vast majority of the game, but unfortunately the very last turn gets cut off, and I do apologize for that. But we get to see most of the game, so I did want to still post it, and I'll kind of explain what happens when we get to that point. But other than that, sit back and enjoy the game, and I will talk to you guys once it's done. At the start of the game, Shawn goes first, followed by Bilal, Jason, and then myself. On his first turn, Shawn plays a Tainted Isle and casts Soul Ring. Bilal plays a Snow-Covered Forest. Jason plays an island and then casts Wayfarer's Bauble. I play a Plains. Shawn plays a tapped Isolated Chapel. Bilal plays a mountain. Jason plays an island and then sacrifices Wayfarer's Bauble to put an island into play from his library. I play a mountain and then cast Fire Diamond. Shawn plays a Hallowed Fountain tapped and then casts Diregraph Colossus, which makes him a 2/2 zombie token whenever he casts a zombie spell. Bilal plays a Cinderglade and then casts his commander, Radha, Heart of Keld. Jason casts a Kefnet's Monument, making his blue creatures cost 1 less and tapping down creatures whenever he plays a creature, and then plays a Guildless Commons, returning an island to hand. I play a Plains and cast Nettle Sentinel, which can tap to do 1 damage to each opponent and untaps whenever I cast a colorless spell. Shawn plays a Secluded Steppe, and then casts Tormod the Desecrator, so whenever a creature leaves his graveyard, he makes a 2/2 zombie, and this triggers Diregraph Colossus, making a zombie token. Bilal plays a Rootbound Crag, and then casts Nylea Keen-Eyed, reducing the cost of his creatures by 1. Jason plays an island, and casts Cavalier of Gales, drawing 3 cards and putting 2 cards from his hand on top of his library. This triggers Kefnet's Monument, and he taps down the Diregraph Colossus, and it can't untap on Shawn's next turn. On my turn, I play a Mountain, and then I tap Nettle Sentinel, doing 1 damage to each opponent. And I follow that up by casting a Morph, which untaps the Sentinel since it's colorless. And I cast a Skirk Alarmist, which has haste and can tap to turn a face-down creature face up. On Shawn's turn, he plays a Terramorphic Expanse, sacrificing it to put a swamp into play from his library, and then casts Rooftop Storm, letting him play zombies for free. This lets him cast Verena Lich Queen for free from the command zone, making a zombie token with the Colossus. And then he moves to combat, attacking me for 6, drawing 2 cards, discarding 2 cards, and gaining 2 life. I decide to block 4 of it with my Morph, and then I activate the Skirk Alarmist to turn it face up. This reveals a Daru Sanctifier, which destroys an enchantment when it's turned face up, destroying the Rooftop Storm, and then the Sanctifier dies to Tormod. On Bilal's turn, he casts Circuitous Route, putting 2 basic lands into play from his library. He then plays a Stomping Ground tapped from the top of his library thanks to Radha, and passes. Jason plays an island, and then attacks me for 5 with the Cavalier. And in his second main phase, he casts a Fairy Seer, scrying 2 and tapping down Verena on cast. He then casts a Chart a Course, drawing 2 cards, and casts a Stormcrow, which also allows him to tap my Nettle Sentinel. However, in response, I decide to tap the Sentinel myself, doing 1 damage to each opponent. On my turn, I play a Mountain, and then cast a Morph, which untaps my Nettle Sentinel, and I then tap the Sentinel to do 1 damage to each opponent, before casting another Morph and untapping the Sentinel yet again. On Shawn's turn, he plays an unclaimed territory, naming Zombie, and then attacks Jason for 10, drawing 4 cards, discarding 4 cards, and gaining 4 life. While discarding, Shawn winds up discarding From Under the Floorboards and casts it for its madness cost. This allows him to create 6 tapped zombie tokens and gain 6 life. On Bilal's turn, he plays a Grove of the Burn Willows from the top of his library, casts Dryad of the Elysian Grove, which allows him to play an extra land each turn, and then he casts Cultivate, putting a basic land into play tapped and 1 into his hand. He then plays the snow-covered forest he got as his second land drop, and casts Neheb the Eternal, which gives him a red mana in his second main phase for each life his opponents lost this turn. On Jason's turn, he casts Sprite Noble, giving his flyers +0/+1, and tapping down Diregraph Colossus. He then casts a Sword of the Animist and equips it to his Fairy Seer, giving it +1/+1 and letting him put a land into play when it attacks, which he immediately does by attacking Shawn for 2. Then, at the end of Jason's turn, I activate Nettle Sentinel to do 1 damage to each opponent. On my turn, I play a Mountain, and then I attack Shawn for 2 with a Morph, but before the damage, I morph it up, revealing an Exalted Angel. This allows me to do 4 damage and gains 4 life. Then in my second main phase, I cast another Morph, activating the Nettle Sentinel with the untap trigger on the stack to ping each opponent for 1, and then untap it. On Shawn's turn, he casts Cemetery Reaper, making a zombie token and giving all his zombies +1/+1, and then he attacks me for 24 total damage, drawing 8 cards, discarding 8 cards, and gaining 8 life on attacks. Before blocks though, I activate Skirk Alarmist to turn one of my morphs face up. This reveals Iron Fist Crusher, which can block any number of creatures, so I block all the damage, killing the Crusher but none of the zombies, meaning I take nothing. In his second main phase, Shawn cast Victimize, sacrificing a creature to return Diregraph Captain and Grave Titan to play, making 2 additional zombies and giving them all another +1/+1. On Bilal's turn, he activates Nylea's ability, revealing the top card of his deck, which is Ronus the Indomitable, and puts it to hand since it's a creature. He then casts Ronus, and follows that up by casting Inferno Titan, doing 3 damage to Diregraph Captain, killing it. On Jason's turn, he mutates Sea Dasher Octopus on top of the Fairy Seer, tapping down Grave Titan, and then he attacks Shawn for 3 with the Fairy Seer, putting a land into play and drawing a card when it deals combat damage. Then in his second main phase, he casts Eligith Crossroads Augur, tapping down Ronus. At the end of his turn, I activate Nettle Sentinel to do 1 damage to each opponent. Unfortunately, at this point, my computer decided to stop recording the game, so we can't actually see the end of it. Luckily, though, on my next turn I simply played Gerrard and passed, and then Shawn casts an Archfiend of Ifnir, which winds up wiping out everyone else's boards when he attacks, which led the rest of us to concede, so Shawn wins the game very quickly after this, but unfortunately, like I said, we don't get to see the end of it. Alright, so that was a pretty short game, all things considered. Again, I do apologize that the end kind of got cut off. My computer decided it was just very angry and didn't want to cooperate that day, but we got most of the game, so I felt it was still worth putting up. I think that our Bororph deck did a pretty good job, all things considered. We had a couple of surprises that our opponents were not ready for. Being able to flip up the morph that lets us block a ton of creatures was incredibly useful and definitely not something anyone saw coming, especially since we were completely tapped out thanks to the Skirk Alarmist. But I do hope to actually try this deck again in the future. It was a ton of fun. Boros is my personal favorite color combination, and I can't say no to a good Morph. So this deck may show up again in the future. Otherwise, Shawn's deck did kind of exactly what we predicted. It, made a bunch of tokens and was extremely threatening very, very quickly. And then I think that if there had been a couple more turns, Bilal was also getting pretty scary. He also had a giant board full of creatures who were very large. And then Jason was getting a ton of value being able to draw cards since he had just played Eligeth. So I think if the game had gone a couple more turns, there's no way to know who would have won. But the Archfiend of Ifnir off the top for Shawn really just kind of sealed the deal for everybody. So I hope you guys enjoyed the game. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck tech, the video. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please do let me know in the comments. You can send them to me on Twitter, Reddit, email, all that stuff. That'll be in the description as well as at the beginning of the video in case you missed it. But I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.